my. Thank you very much. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. My lords, ladies, honoured guests, dears and darlings. It's an extraordinary honour to be asked to deliver this BAFTA lecture. There is, as far as I know, no profession in this country that likes to talk about itself more than broadcasting. Over the past few years, I've been asked if I might consider contributing to talks, lectures, speeches, panels, and other debates, disquisitions, discourses, diatribes, and discussions all over the country. The film industry doesn't do anything like this on such a scale, nor does the music industry or the publishing industry, so far as I'm aware. Maybe it's because talking is what people in television do best. Maybe it's because television is uniquely in a state of crisis, transition, change, and revolution. Or perhaps it's something to do with the desperate sense that broadcasters have that they need to justify and explain themselves all the time. Your guess is probably much better than mine as to the reason. I am fully and furiously and timorously aware that over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, I might say 1,000 harmless, possibly even true things, and yet make one hasty or ill-considered remark, and it will dog me for weeks to come. For I'm to talk about television, and if there is one thing that the newspapers of this country like to pounce upon, it is any breath of criticism directed from an insider at broadcasting networks and their executives. It's one of the media's favorite indoor sports. Imagine, for example, that I were to heap praise on the hierarchy of the BBC for 40 minutes, but devote just 1/4 of 1 minute to questioning, Junior Apprentice, for example. A programme I have never incidentally seen, so don't expect me actually to remark on it. It's like Kyrgyzstan. I know it exists, but the chances of me ever spending any time there are very remote. For all I know, however, Junior Apprentice sets new standards in intelligent, superbly conceived and brilliantly executed public service broadcasting. The point is that were I to give just one sideways swipe at it, my earlier 40 minutes of praise would be ignored. In a withering attack on the BBC and its management, Stephen Fry unleashed a devastating criticism of reality programming. Or at BAFTA last night, Fry launched a personal attack on Director General Mark Thompson that had an amazed audience of industry insiders reeling in their designer seats, etc., etc. You get the picture. No matter how circumspect I intend to be, that will happen. I suppose I could deliver a lecture so bland, so complimentary, so suffused with love, admiration, and optimism that even a cultural journalist would be unable to read license fee skepticism or compliance doubt into it. But I haven't been asked here to be bland, and I would be failing in what I suppose I might pompously call my duty if I were not at least to attempt to address the issues of today in relation to television as I see them. But first I have some interests to declare. You will have to judge how much I am either a sycophantic supplicant toadying to the executives who put bread in my mouth, or how much I am a suicidal idiot, dumb enough to bite the hands that feed me. Much of my life is spent working for broadcasting companies, for networks, as Americans would call them. I'm lucky enough to be employed by the BBC and by ITV as a freelance actor, presenter, documentary maker, and other such figures. Some programs I'm involved with are directly commissioned and made by the broadcasters in-house. Others are pitched and produced by independent companies. And on that head, I must declare another interest. I am in the independent production business myself. With my partner Gina Carter, I founded some years ago a small company called Sprout Pictures. A little while later, 25% of it was bought by BBC Worldwide, with whom we therefore have a kind of loose affiliation, including a first look distribution deal. All this is public domain and very boring for anyone, but some might be interested, and you must take whatever comments I have to make in the light of that information. I only right for me to background it before I begin. On top of that, I have interests in various startups, digital online startups that might be considered in direct competition to the existing broadcasting structures and, how I hate the phrase, business models. So you might think I have reason on the one hand to placate and sweeten the executives in the traditional television companies, and reason on the other to undermine and weaken their very foundations. But I have to declare an even greater interest, one that I hope you believe will override any petty business or professional interests I might be said to have as an actor or a writer or a producer or minor entrepreneur. I have to declare that I love television. I love the range and richness of the programming. I love its ambition, its scope, its innovation. I love the tradition, the technological innovation, the gossip, the corporate drama on the inside, the reach and influence on the outside. I admire the talent and the commitment of so many working in the field. I love everything about what television has been, what it still is, and what it might yet be. If I criticize anything about it, I hope you will be able to see that I do so from the point of view of love, not enmity. I grew up in what seems now to me and to most cultural and broadcast historians to have been a golden age in television. Hugh Carlton Green and Lord Hill ruled the BBC in what appeared to be a long Edwardian summer of prosperity, innovation, experiment, and success. ITV also produced a golden age of those ITC adventure dramas, from the Avengers to the Professionals, by way of the Champions, the Persuaders, the Protectors, the Prisoner, the Baron, the Adventurer, the Man in a Suitcase, a dozen others. When I was 7, Doctor Who started. In the next 10 years, the great classics of serious and groundbreaking contemporary drama poured forth from Ken Loach, David Mercer, Mike Leigh, Dennis Potter, and all those pioneering Wednesday Play and Play for Today Allens, Alan Pryor, Alan Clark, Alan Plater, Alan Bennett. More mainstream drama like Coronation Street, Upstairs, Downstairs, Z-Cars, Colditz streamed out to us too. The great classics of comedy and entertainment from Monty Python and Dad's Army, Rising Damp, Benny Hill, Morecambe and Wise, Tommy Cooper, The Two Ronnies, Reggie Perrin, The Stanley Baxter Picture Show, The Generation Game, It's a Knockout, Top of the Pops, Parkinson, Scylla, Lulu, Val Doonican. The genre-defining documentaries, Civilization, The Ascent of Man, Ways of Seeing, The Shock of the New, Alistair Cook's America, and the continuing innovative rise of the Bristol Natural History Unit and the work of David Attenborough, and that Anglia Aubrey Buxton's survival team. And the golden age of children's TV from Anna Hume and others. Blue Peter, Multicoloured Swap Shop, The Clangers, Bagpuss, Mr. Ben, Play School, Rent-A-Ghost, The Magic Roundabout, Jackanory, Magpie, Catweasel, How. In politics and current affairs and arts, there was Monitor, Panorama, World in Action, Omnibus, the South Bank Show. It's fun to list all these programs, but is it perhaps pointless? This was then, but this is now. Those programs meant everything to me because of the age I was, perhaps, and because television was inventing itself in front of my very eyes. The 23 and 24 million plus who tuned in to Eric and Ernie's Christmas shows can never be assembled together to watch a television program again. Maybe if England makes it to the finals of the World Cup, something close can be achieved. But television as the nation's fireplace, the hearth and the heart of the country, the focus of our communal cultural identity, that television is surely dead. It seems unlikely ever to return. Instead of being the nation's fireplace, TV is closer to being the nation's central heating. It's conveniently on in every room. It's less discernible, less of a focus, more of an ambient atmosphere. In the 1980s, as I achieved adulthood, the nation achieved Thatcherism and deregulation. The whole business of analyzing television's entrails and reporting on them began. The Annan Report was succeeded by the Peacock Report and dozens of others. Charter renewal for the BBC became a regular game. Channel 4 arrived, and then 5. ITV's local networks were refranchised And the old stations, from Thames to Tyne Tees, from Harlech to Southern, from ATV to Anglia, from Westwood to Grampian, all began to disappear or gobble each other up. The independent production company was born, Zenith, Hattrick, Mentorn, Talkback, and the rest. Aside from these enforced changes in structure and corporate governance, Thatcherism had seen the first concerted political opposition, ideological opposition, to the way the BBC in particular was seen to run itself and to behave. The trick was conceived in which the BBC could be blamed for being at one and the same time old-fashioned, stuck in the mud, reactionary, elitist, hidebound, de haut en bas, patriarchal, top-down, patronizing, and simultaneously left-wing, trendy, bien-pensant, and unpatriotic. Because radical now meant right-wing. Modern and progressive meant consumer-led and market-oriented. The Tebbits and the Thatchers of this world were not about to allow intellectuals, artists, liberals, and Oxbridge nomenclatura of decadent, self-appointed cultural apparatchiks to decide what was good for the public. The nanny state was bad enough in their eyes, but the schoolmaster state, the Don state, was even worse. And aside from this ideological antipathy, and perhaps driving it, a commercial opposition to the existing order of things appeared too. Sky TV and BSB started fitting satellite dishes and squareals to our roofs, and for the first time the BBC had not just a political enemy, but a business one. That major business enemy also controlled a large newspaper empire, and perhaps not so surprisingly, those newspapers began issuing regular and unrelenting attacks on the BBC. Other press empires bought interests in broadcast media too, and full but undeclared war commenced. Well, it was a one-way enmity, for the print media were allowed to hate and taunt and revile the BBC, but not the other way round. The license fee and the charter and the way they were managed had given advantages to the BBC that supposedly guaranteed freedom, independence, and duties of impartiality, but now those very qualities became sticks with which to beat them. Everyone pays a license fee, the press said, therefore the BBC is ours, and everything it does belongs to us. We own it. We have a right to make the executives travel coach class, to quibble every cup of coffee, every penny spent, all in the name of public probity, all in the cause of transparency, openness, good governance, and clean citizenship. The BBC has itself, for the last 15 years, gone out of its way to ingratiate itself to the public with endless and unbelievably wearisome and embarrassing It's Your BBC roadshows and discussions, forcing successive directors general to sit and debate with mad, vexatious, unhappy people who want to criticize Fiona Bruce's use of blusher or express their indignation at some incidents of the use of the word tits, or even the sight of that said material. The BBC opens up endless have a say sections on its websites and solicits opinion and feedback at every turn. Whether they think listening to the kind of people who actually write in or leave messages to points of view constitutes good practice, or whether it's a sop that they privately laugh up their sleeves at, I cannot tell. I wouldn't presume, personally, to advise the army how to run their brigades or to order their equipment. I don't tell policemen how to run a murder inquiry or how to patrol a football match. Nor would I interfere in the running and equipping of a National Health Service surgical theatre. I may pay for the army, the police, and the health service, or contribute towards it. But while accountability, openness, and public debates in strategy and outcome are all obviously reasonable and indeed requisite parts of democracy, the rest, the interference, the claimed ownership, is just an intolerable intrusion into the jobs of professionals. 60% of people who phoned in about this program disliked it. Yes, but 100% of people who have nothing better to do than telephone a TV station at night are, by definition, desperately in need of help. 564 people, I read this just as I was about to come on stage, 564 people rang the BBC to complain about vuvuzelas. What did they think they were doing? Did they imagine the BBC could go into the stadium and wrench them from the lips of the audience? Did they imagine there was some technical way they could stop the sound being heard? And these are the people about whom executives have to sweat. However, back to the BBC's struggles with government and indeed its own public image. Management, staffing, programming were, starting in the 80s, radically reorganized in the teeth of this criticism, or the fear of potential criticism. And the enforced rule, of course, came in that 25% of the corporation's programming be sourced from the independent sector. Burtian ways with news and producer's choice, outsourcing and downsizing and regionalizing and rejigging continued apace. Charter renewal campaigns and the public image of the BBC were not helped during this period right up to the present day for the next 20 years, as the corporation lurched from crisis to crisis. There was the Iraq-gate Kelly scandal, Queensgate, the Ross Brand scandal, expenses, perceived excesses, lapses and errors. At ITV and Channel 4, things were hardly better. Crazed management buyouts, the £1 billion failure of ITV Digital, funding crises, revenue stream dry-ups, the death of any serious arts or documentary programming, phone line scandals, and all kinds of other misfortunes have befallen. The picture elsewhere has been undeniably rosier. B-Sky B seems to go from strength to strength. Those who criticized Sky TV for being merely a buyer-in of American programs are beginning to have to recognize that the network is now a major producer in its own right. Sky Arts has 2 channels, both also available in HD. They have wrenched, yes, plenty of sporting occasions from the free-to-air terrestrials, but no one can deny that they have along the way revolutionized the quality of sporting commentary, technical representation, analysis, and depth of coverage. They continue to drive innovation with the current move to 3D. The analog switch off and the continued switch to Freeview, Virgin, or B-Sky B will only bring more and more people to alternative channels. The Natural History Unit in Bristol, so long a pioneer and uniquely classy outfit in its field, is finding that Discovery and National Geographic are slowly learning how to make proper natural history television, and that these channels know much more about how to sell worldwide and into the digital systems that are proliferating in every other territory in the world. All of which means less and less advertising money all round, less and less reach, less and less prestige, which was the one quality that British television prided itself on. Authority, kudos, class, quality, excellence, gravitas, prestige. And whither have they fled? Add to this the growing emergence of Hulu and Boxy, YouTube, Vimeo, not as sources of funny clips, but both YouTube and Vimeo are major providers of serious funded channels, channels that produce content. Add to that the encroachment of Google and others into demand internet TV services, and it can be seen that the very notion of a national broadcasting ecosystem seems very difficult to maintain, justify, or believe in. Is television, as we know it, in its old business model, in terminal decline? Well, the big news I have for you is that I have absolutely no idea. It's possible to argue that there is no future for the BBC or ITV or Channel 4 or 5 or any broadcasting network that tries to make television at the national parochial level. Hamstrung by remits to cater to domestic interest, what chance is there that the BBC or ITV or Channel 4 can ever compete internationally? Sport, American drama, movies and comedy will proliferate, with occasional internationally owned reality franchises continuing to slot into prime time. There is every reason to believe in companies that distribute, sell, and broadcast television using subscription and the new advertising models, but there is scant reason to believe in old-fashioned broadcasters. For the fact is, I am not a writer, nor a director, nor an actor, nor a producer, nor a presenter. These names no longer have meaning. I am a content provider. It is now many years since we were told in roaring accents from the masthead of every trade magazine that content was king. We were assured that pipelines, conduits, channels, gateways, and portals were all very well, but that they were meaningless without content to funnel and distribute. Hard to argue with that. The BBC and ITV are still commissioners of and producers of a simply gigantic torrent of content. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of television are required every year, and still will be, whatever outlets and means of distribution are dreamt up by technologists and cunning corporate cleverclogsies. Now, to achieve such a volume of production with any quality, variety, originality, and confidence does not require good business executives. It does not require entrepreneurs. It does not require people who can say business model 17 times in one meeting without blushing. It does not require people who can call writers and producers content providers without wanting to shoot themselves in writhing embarrassment. It does not require people who've gone on courses or people who can tick compliance boxes and fill in risk assessment forms. It doesn't require people with degrees in media studies or people who know how to multitask or attend conferences or give lectures. It does not require people who either give a toss about what's gone before or people who are ignorant of what's gone before. It does not require people who are afraid. It requires a confident producer class, and that calls for people of real creative talent, intelligence, courage, resource, and imagination. For my fear is that almost everyone I have encountered in production, in the making of programs, is afraid. They have much to be afraid of, and much to cage, confine, cripple, and constrain them. Fear is everywhere in the television business in this country. When you are afraid, it is a great deal easier to say no than to say yes. I ought to add, I must add, that personally I have met with nothing but courtesy, kindness, consideration, and enthusiasm in the corridors of all the major broadcasting companies. I'm not suggesting that I have cause to moan. Far from it. I'm extremely lucky, very pleased and proud to have been able to make television programs with the support and guidance of superb professionals. But I do have an idea that may help free the creative talent of producers, writers, directors, and others. It may not be an original idea. For all I know, it has been floated and shot down in the past. I do know that some of my colleagues in the independent sector may think I am mad and suicidal to suggest it. I speak for no one here but myself as I raise this balloon. In order to explain the suggestion, I ought perhaps to go over what can only be called the business models currently pertaining in the marketplace in television today, vis-à-vis independence. Let us suppose you are an independent production company and you have an idea for a new drama series. You take it to a broadcaster, BBC or ITV, say, according to how much heft you might have with that company, a senior or middling executive, commissioner, head of a department. If they like your idea, they pay you what is confusingly called a license fee, for which they get the right to broadcast your series on their channel a set number of times. This fee barely covers the costs of production, but as an independent, you can make more money because you keep all the worldwide rights. In other words, you can sell your series around the globe, and the original domestic broadcaster, the BBC or the ITV, doesn't get a penny from those international sales. That is the standard independent model and has been for many years, and I'm sure many in this room are all too familiar with it. Well, I cannot be the first, I suspect, to notice an inbuilt problem with that. The BBC, and to some extent also ITV and Channel 4, will only commission content which is domestically skewed, that speaks to remits of nationhood, British interest, British cultural and often extremely regional social concerns. That's fine with many programs. Why would Germany or Peru want to buy Watchdog, for example? But this current model means that the broadcasters, the BBC and the ITV, have no stake in making films, dramas, documentaries or features of international appeal, while at the same time, the independents who depend upon them have a stake in little else. The result is dramas and documentaries that have one foot planted in resolutely British soil, with the other wobbling and hopping and pointing its toes hopefully in the direction of the world. The result is indies that are just one commission away from insolvency. The result is a feeding frenzy for format over content. We've all seen or read about the financial rewards that successful reality and talent shows can offer. So independents are chasing each other's tails madly in a desire to come up with these formats, these empty shells, in the hope, ideally, that some larger independent company will buy them for millions and they can then be saved from the difficult, delicate and unrewarding business of actual production and making of original programming. Surely all this talent on the production and technical side, all this talent in acting and writing, all this talent, in other words, for content provision, isn't to be set aside, put to grass, ignored, because content, it turns out, isn't king after all, but rather format is. So my suggestion, and it may be that my independent production friends will want to burn me at the stake for even hinting that such a thing might be desirable, is that broadcasters, the networks, take a share in foreign sales. In return for that, they offer larger license fees and naturally accept stories, ideas, and, yes, if it must be, formats that have wider appeal, greater scope, range, ambition, and heft. Many independents are hanging on by their fingernails and have to take nugatory license fees just to pay for office rental and the intern's Oyster card. Surely we can do better than that. Surely we can incentivize both the broadcaster and the independent to think bigger, better, richer, and more internationally. Surely the commercial sector in particular can only benefit from another source aside from advertising being added to their revenue stream. It would take negotiation between PACT for the producers and representatives of the independents and of the networks and of government who may need to relax remits in order to allow this. It may be that this new model will only be allowed for ITV, Sky, UK TV and channels 4 and 5, etc. And that the BBC will be forced to stick to domestic emphasis and be excluded from such a new model. It may be that the super indies, the big raptors that are a part of other companies that are themselves a part of other companies that are owned by the biggest media conglomerates in the world, will try and swoop in and take over the negotiations, drowning out the plaintive chirrups from the true little indie nests. It may be, of course, that I am talking nonsense, that I don't understand business or broadcasting or anything else. It seems to make sense to me, and I cannot believe I'm the first person to have thought of it. I suspect it would help ITV more than it would help the BBC, for anything that potentially adds another source of revenue must seem desirable to that strapped institution. But what I fear is that without such a restructuring, British television will lose greatly. That any hope there is for real programming, for originality and greatness beyond the domestic sphere will dwindle and die. And any hope we have that greatness can exist only in the domestic sphere is hopeless when a large drama audience is considered to be 3 million. That is just not possible. Well, my proposal is a modest one, and perhaps a forlorn and a foolish one. I don't pretend to be a businessman. Spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations make me want to scream, gouge out my eyes, and stab my ears. I've never been able to read a profit and loss account or a balance sheet, and I go swimmy and feel sick if I have to read a legal document. Because, on the whole, I'd rather watch television. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. There we are. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Great stuff. I just found out that I gave you your first job on television. Did you know that?
Yeah, I was in the Footlights, which is this club at Cambridge, and myself and Hugh Laurie and Emma Thompson were all members of it, and it was like I had to spend like a Tuesday afternoon people coming and offering sketches, and then in the evening I'd accept them and say yes, that's good or that's not good, and we had rather a small number, so I hastily wrote a number of quick visual sketches known as quickies, and one of them was someone having a pee, and then it's all mimed obviously, it's on a stage smaller than this, then he washes his hands, and then he goes and there's no towel, and he's looking around and can't think what to do, and there's a man standing there, so he knees him in the groin, and the fellow goes and he just dries his hands. It's completely, but it was great because I got this letter from John Lloyd, the producer of Not the 9 O'Clock News, which had just become the cult-most program on TV, the most successful and exciting comedy show on television, asking if they could use this particular quickie. And I, of course, immediately said yes. And then I told Hugh, who was president of the Footlights, and he said, "You bloody idiot, that means we can't now use it in our show." And of course, it never occurred to me because I just wanted to see my name on the screen.
I may have signed the letter, but I shouldn't take credit. It was Marcus Mortimer.
Marcus Mortimer,
who was the AFM who spotted the thing.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if this might help tie some things together, because I thought it was a model, a miraculous model, Stephen, of a non-ad hominem speech that he managed to avoid, hurting anybody's feelings at all. And I'm much ruder than that. But I just put it like this, that in those days, with Not the 9 O'Clock News, which I was 27 when I got that job, in the intervening, whatever it is, 30-odd years, I produced Blackadder, as you know, and Spitting Image and QI, as well as Not the 9 O'Clock News. In the 8 years since we started QI together, we have every year pitched programs to television companies. We have yet to have one success. I think that's odd.
Yes, I guess it is. It's very, I mean, when you say we, you're talking about you and others, not you and me.
The people behind QI.
Yeah, the people behind QI, yes. I suppose it is. It is very difficult when it sounds like an old person's bitter whinge. I'm not saying that's what you do. You have,
it is.
There is no comedy producer with a greater pedigree than you. To go from Not 9 O'Clock News to Spitting Image to Blackadder to QI is an extraordinary thing, and there is no one who comes close. And therefore, you might have every reason to believe at least they would give you a meeting and that they would trust your judgment. Because I think it's right in saying that each one of those programs had a very rocky start. That is the nature of all good comedy. It's difficult and it doesn't immediately take off. Blackadder the first, the Blackadder was more or less a disaster, wasn't it? And it was only just by the skin of your teeth that you got John Howard Davis and others to agree to Blackadder 2. No one is saying that you should put the lunatics in charge of the asylum. We all know it's a serious, grim world, that money has to be more accountable, and that, but it's not about whether there are creative writers. That's what I meant in the lecture, it's a producer class. That is what I see as missing. Not because they aren't talented producers, and I'm certainly not saying they're not intelligent or resourceful or indeed imaginative, but I suspect they are simply lacking in confidence. They just don't have the confidence that any really remarkable suggestion they make will be accepted. Now, the BBC, if they were here, and let's face it, most of us always think of the BBC when we talk of broadcasting, they would point to BBC Three and they would point to a recent list of successes in comedy, for example, from Little Britain and Gavin and Stacey, and they would say, what more could you possibly expect us to do? And you're right, these are very successful, but they are also unbelievably balkanized. They are set into a particular demographic. This is what I mean by television not being the nation's fireplace. It's a house, and those programs are the slightly embarrassing adolescent child's bedroom with the no entry sign on it, the one who wears black T-shirts and is a bit weird. And that's programming for him. And then there's programming for a rather powdery grandmother who likes Zoe Wanamaker and Robert Lindsay in My Family, and that's lovely. And that's fine, great. You know, what I would say, if I wanted to be angry, if I wanted to bluster, I would say infantilism is the problem. The number of times I turn on the television and I think, gosh, children's television's got on. That's a really good art documentary about that paint. Oh my God, it's 9 o'clock in the evening. This is for grown-ups? It's just shocking. I mean, the only dramas the BBC will boast about are Merlin and Doctor Who, which are fine, but they're children's programs. They're not for adults. And they're very good children's programs, don't get me wrong. They're wonderfully written and marvelously presented, but they are not for adults. They are like a chicken nugget. It's delicious. Every now and again, we all like a chicken nugget. Every now and again. But if you are an adult, you want something surprising, savory, sharp, unusual, cosmopolitan, alien, challenging, complex, ambiguous, possibly even slightly disturbing and wrong. You want to try those things because that's what being adult means. And we live in an infantilized world where the food of children, you know, sort of mixed up fruit and ice cream as a drink, and pappy chicken and pappy beef in white bread buns with sugared sauces and salt and fat, is now the food for adults as well. Oh hell, I'll have that. You know, people have that in front of the television, and the television gives them the same thing back. It's children's television. It's entirely infantilized. It's not grown up. Now, I'm not saying that all television should be pompous, it should be academic, should be intellectual, none of those things. But it ought to surprise and to astonish and to make us feel perhaps the possibility there is a world outside that we know nothing of, to provoke us, to provoke in the best sense as well as sometimes the worst sense, to surprise us, to outrage us. Instead of which, because it's children, it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. He's a villain or he's a hero. Here's a drama series, and within the first 5 minutes, I know he's like that because he would have had problems at home. She's like that because, you know, she's lost her faith. He's like that because his wife doesn't understand him. You know, it's just, everything is just given to you. Nothing is, you know, nothing is given time. And we're so used to laughing at Americans because they are so vulgar, aren't they, and so stupid. And you watch some good American TV, and they give it time, and they give it maturity, and they give it surprise and shock and adulthood. Not shock in the cheap, childish sense, but in an emotional and impactful way. And I think, I've always believed that the more television trusts that a British audience are not children, are not indeed the kind of hysterical people who write or email or leave weird messages on points of view. More we trust that there is genuine intelligence and an appetite for something new there, the better our television will be. That's really what I think.
Okay. I discovered through there's a network of former QI elves who work all over television. I've moved on to do various things, some of whom have become very successful quite young, partly because the way they're trained or taught or encouraged to be at QI is to say what they think and to say, and not to try and guess what we like.
Yeah.
And so they are, in some areas of development, considered geniuses because they say what normal people think and say, which is not the way many people at that low level dare behave, lest their 3-month contract be not reviewed.
This is a grown-up world. Just 2 days ago, I was doing a program, and it was for an arts channel, I have to say. This person came up to me, and the thing that astonished me was that she didn't blush or giggle or go, I know, isn't it ridiculous? She went, hi, I'm the celebrity booker. And I was being interviewed on an arts program. And what was I supposed to say? Thank you for booking me as a celebrity. It was just, that's the world we live in. Hi, I'm your celebrity booker.
Well,
what's that
infantilism
even mean? I'm glad she's got a job, and I'm really happy, but it's just so strange.
The point I was going to pick up on, Stephen, by way of one of this network of elves said to me through the grapevine that they were planning in the BBC to make a kind of QI for kids.
Right.
And I said, but there already
Yeah.
is one of those.
Well,
it's called QI.
Yeah, I mean,
Because we don't make
part
a
of our
program for anyone.
most enthusiastic constituency.
Our children.
Yeah, and I know it's the kind of program I certainly would have liked when I was 12, 10 even, you know.
We had Daniel Radcliffe on a special edition of QI the other night, and the green room afterwards was full of 9-year-old and 11-year-old girls, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
It was their perfect evening out because they had Harry Potter and QI in the same box.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you about this is, I think the difference between when I first worked in telly in the 80s and now is, in those days we were encouraged and pushed to make telly for ourselves. We tried to make programs that we would like to watch, radio shows that we would like to listen to. And now there's this Chinese wall.
Exactly, that presumption that the British public won't like it. And no, the British public want to see this. On the one hand, you give them all kinds of compliance issues and boxes that have to be ticked, and I'm sure for very good reasons. Which everyone knows the public don't want. This is just a waste of time. I had a friend, literally, who directed an episode of Spooks, which is a jolly successful spy drama where every week somebody has to drive very, very fast to stop London being blown up by either a biological or a nuclear bomb or something similar. And anyway, he was directing it, and he was telling the actor, get in like that, and saying, and then just, we'll accelerate off, we'll keep the camera still, and you'll go out of shot. We might do another one in which we pan with you. And then somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, well, he's got to put his seatbelt in. He said he's got to drive, he's got no time, he's got to save London from, but he's got to, no, he must. It's absolutely. All right, so somehow, okay, as you go, just put your hand there and start to move it, and we'll pan off. When we next see you, you'll have it on, right? So then there's a scene where he has to get on his mobile phone or walkie-talkie, and he can't be driving and using his mobile. He's going to save London. No, he can't. No, he absolutely must stop and pull in. Look, there's an earlier scene where he shot someone in the face. So he's allowed to shoot people in the face, but he's not allowed to talk on the telephone to save 6.5 million people. No, it's written down there in the risk assessment sheet, can you see? And you signed off on it, because you don't sign things, you sign off on them. And that's what happened. There is no possible excuse, defense, or claim that you can make that justifies such absurdity. And that's one reason for fear. And to that has been added, of course, the Brand Ross disaster, which has sent fear through every other aspect of programming, as we know in QI. You can't now bleep. So if someone swears, you can't then bleep it, because that's cheating. That's sort of having your cake and you're sort of swearing, but even though no one can see what the word is, you still can't bleep. It's like telling the Vatican they can't even have fig leaves. What? But that's what's happened. So there's that, you know. And on the other hand, there's, as you say, there's the executive, the commission who say, God, I love this. It's brilliant, it's funny, it's original, but it's a bit, well, we don't know where this person comes from. Yes, that's right. When you meet people, you don't know where they come from. They don't explain themselves in the first quarter of an hour. You don't flash back into their dreams where they were abused by a nanny or whatever. God, you can feel pity for people who are difficult. Look at Cracker. You know, you can feel pity for a man who treats everybody abominably. It's such a pity.
It's this thing that the things flipped about is, I think in the 80s, you mentioned the people who write in about, complaining about things. And I remember at the very first episode of Not the 9 O'Clock News, we did have 30 complaints, 30 phone complaints, and we, jammed the switchboard. And I was summoned in to see my head of department, Jimmy Gilbert, who said, right, you've got 30 complaints, you've jammed the switchboard, you're a disgrace, it should have been 60, get out.
Oh,
because the idea was that if you were going to do anything cutting edge and you only got 30 complaints, only 30 letters in green ink was ridiculous.
Yeah.
The point is that we had, as it were, we did not take seriously 2 complaints in bad handwriting, but we did have great respect for the audience as a whole. A Bit of Frownline is a very good example of making incredibly intelligent programming on the grounds that other people who didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge would also enjoy it.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've stopped that. The idea is that, that people are too stupid to get what you and I might like.
you have to do the equivalent of estuarializing your comedy. You have to be a bit like Tony Blair and go, yeah, I did go to the second most expensive public school in Scotland, but if I do glottal stops, then you might love me more. Well, I mean, it's fine, but it's just another kind of snobbery. If we're just brave enough to be who we are, not be embarrassed about the fact that it's not through our fault our parents sent us to private school, or not through our fault we didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. Neither of those are sins, neither of those are moral qualities, neither of those are things that make you a good television performer, executive or producer, or nor do they necessarily make you a bad one. Just forget the whole boiling of it. Just get on and concentrate on talent and enthusiasm and passion. And don't be so hobbled and crippled by this self-consciousness, because it's the enemy of all art, is self-consciousness, isn't it? The moment the painter suddenly is frozen and he can't move his brush properly, the moment the musician can't because he's lost the music, and the moment the actor suddenly sees himself rather than being inside the moment, as they say, then all art dies. And television, to some extent, is an art. And it's a collaborative one. And everybody, in order for it to work, has to have two conditions simultaneously, and they often flow against each other. One is confidence, and the other is relaxation. Concentration and relaxation, essentially, is what it is. You have to be able to concentrate, focus completely, and yet be relaxed. If you're concentrating and not relaxed, you're tense and you're afraid. And if you're relaxed without concentrating, you're just all over the place. But if you've got both, you are, as a sportsman would say, in the zone. You're just seeing it properly and you're flying.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we mustn't keep you, so please join me in a round of applause for the wonderful Stephen Fry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very nicely done. Thank you.
Really
You're so kind. Thank you.
Really good.
Well, thank you very much.